I hadn't slept in nearly 72 hours. 3 states, 1 fugitive, 2 motel coffees, and a truck seat I'd used as a bed. All I wanted was a shower, a meal, and the silence of my own home. Instead, I turned onto my street and froze. My front door was wide open, hinge cracked, frame splintered. Inside, my living room looked like a tactical unit had gone to war with it. Couch flipped, drawers dumped, books shredded across the floor. And in the middle of the wreckage stood 4 people in matching navy polos and plastic Amazon badges. HOA police. One of them was live streaming the break-in to the neighborhood Facebook group like it was a community event. Another was digging through my wife's purse. The filing cabinet in my office, my locked reinforced federal filing cabinet, lay pried open, its contents scattered. Witness protection files, active case notes, addresses that cannot fall into the wrong hands. My wife sat against the wall, blouse torn, shoulder bruised, phone smashed at her feet. Karen smiled at me. Your suspicious documents have been seized. I didn't speak. They thought they were raiding a neighbor. They had no idea they just committed federal crimes on federal property. I could feel my pulse in my teeth. 3 days of tracking a fugitive across state lines will do that. Your body runs on fumes, your head fills with fog, and the only thought holding you together is the promise of home. Home. The one place where danger isn't supposed to follow you. But as I stepped deeper into the wreckage of my living room, I realized danger doesn't always wear a gun or a criminal record. Sometimes it wears a pink blouse, a cheap badge, and a neighborhood smile. Karen stood there, hands on her hips, grinning like this destruction was something she'd trained her whole life for. She started listing violations in a tone that sounded like a wannabe police chief giving a press briefing. Behind her, her 3 fake officers puffed their chests out, proud of their little moment of authority. They looked like kids playing dress-up, right up until I saw my wife. She was sitting against the wall, blouse torn, bruise blooming across her shoulder. When I crouched beside her, she whispered, "They twisted my arm, smashed my phone when I tried calling you." I didn't yell. I didn't threat. I didn't even blink. I just stood, pulled out my phone, and dialed the federal command number I know by heart. "Reporting a federal evidence breach," I said quietly. "Multiple suspects still on scene, active interference with protected files." The HOA police froze. Karen laughed, actually laughed, thinking this was still a game she controlled. She didn't understand. They didn't just cross a line, they crossed a federal boundary. Florida heat doesn't just sit on you, it presses like a heavy hand between your shoulders. By the time Daisy and I pulled into the neighborhood with the moving truck, the air felt thick enough to drink. 3 days of packing, 1 long highway haul, and now a late afternoon sun beating down on us like punishment. We were tired, sweaty, half delirious, but relieved. Until we heard yelling. It came from 3 houses down, sharp, metallic, cutting through the quiet street. An elderly woman stood in her front yard, clutching a ceramic garden gnome to her chest like it was the last thing keeping her upright. Her hands trembled around the little figurine, and towering over her finger jabbing, eyes wide with manufactured authority was Karen. We didn't know her name then, but we felt her before we heard her. "Margaret, the bylaws are very clear," she snapped, voice carrying across the entire block. "Unapproved decorative items must be removed within 24 hours or daily compounding fines will apply." "It was my husband's gift," the old woman whispered. Karen stepped closer, tone ice cold. 24 hours. And that is final." The gnome shook in Margaret's arms. Karen spun around, chin lifted high, marching back toward her silver minivan, the one with the proud HOA president sticker slapped across the bumper like a declaration of war. Daisy exhaled slowly beside me. "That woman," she murmured, "is a problem." I didn't disagree. We hadn't even unpacked a single box before the dictator of the cul-de-sac made her next move. Karen's eyes locked onto our truck like a hawk tracking prey. Within seconds she was walking toward us with the determined strut of someone who believed the entire neighborhood existed for her approval. "Good afternoon," she chirped. Smile stretched so tight it looked painful. "You must be the new resident." I wiped sweat from my forehead. "Yes ma'am, I'm Frank. This is my wife Daisy." Karen handed us a folder thick enough to stop a bullet labeled Florida Estates Homeowners Association Standards and Obligations. "This," she said brightly, "is your rulebook. Every resident is expected to follow these guidelines to maintain our community's prestige." There it was, a tiny pause before the last word. Pride mixed with threat. I flipped open the first page. 40 sections. Fee charts. Approved lawn heights. Decorative permissions. Monthly inspections. A complaint form. A revised complaint form. A section about mailbox uniformity that looked longer than the U.S. Constitution. Karen's smile didn't move. "We're a very involved community," she said sweetly. "Active participation ensures property values remain high." Her eyes drifted past me and landed on my truck. The smile hardened. "And that vehicle," she added, "may require discussion, but we'll get to that later." Daisy crossed her arms. I could practically hear her thinking, "Try it." Karen clasped her hands together and beamed. "Well, welcome to Florida Estates. I'm sure we'll get along beautifully." She said it like a threat disguised as a welcome. Then, with a tight nod, she turned and marched back to her kingdom. Daisy leaned close. "That woman is going to make our lives hell." I didn't know then how right she was. But that afternoon, standing in the heat, watching Karen's minivan peel away, we felt something unsettling settle over our new home. A warning. A tremor. A seed of conflict waiting to bloom. We hadn't even unpacked yet, and the HOA president had already drawn the first line in the sand. "Welcome to HOA." The first violation letter showed up just 4 days after we moved in. A bright yellow sheet taped to my front door, flapping in the morning breeze like a warning flag. At the top, in bold red letters, it read, "Notice of violation, unapproved vehicle." I remember staring at it for a good 10 seconds, thinking maybe it was meant for someone else. But no, my name, my address, my truck. A 2018 F-150, clean, well-kept, completely normal. Apparently in Karen's world, normal was a crime. I brought the letter inside and sat at the kitchen counter flipping through the rule book she'd given us. I read the vehicle guidelines section 3 times. No mention of prohibited makes or models, no mention of pickup trucks being unapproved, nothing even remotely close to what she was claiming. Daisy leaned over my shoulder. "Let me guess, Karen." I sighed. "Who else?" I finally called the number listed at the bottom of the notice. Karen answered on the second ring, her voice overly cheerful, dripping with that same false sweetness she'd used on moving day. "Florida Estates, HOA, this is Karen. How may I help you?" "This is Frank," I said. "I just received a violation about my truck. I reviewed the bylaws and there's nothing in there that says pickups aren't allowed." There was a pause, then the smile returned to her voice. "Oh, it's not about the type of vehicle, Mr. Falk. It's about the community aesthetic. Florida Estates is a premium environment, and we maintain standards that reflect that." I blinked. "Aesthetic?" "Yes, your truck is functional." She said the word like it was a contagious disease. "It's a personal vehicle," I replied. "Clean, modern, registered, insured. There's nothing wrong with it." "I'm not questioning its legality," she continued, "but the board has determined that its appearance does not align with the look and feel of our neighborhood. Residents typically drive more refined vehicles. We encourage a cohesive presentation." I almost laughed. "It's a truck, Karen. It's not a monster truck. It's not leaking oil. It's not covered in flames and skull decals. It's just a truck." Another pause. Her tone cooled. "I understand your perspective, but the violation stands. You have 7 days to garage the vehicle or remove it from the property." "My garage is full of moving boxes," I said, "and my wife's car is in there. It's not physically possible." "Well, you could rent a storage unit," she suggested brightly. "There's a very affordable facility about 15 minutes away. Several residents use it for items that don't meet the neighborhood aesthetic." I rubbed my temples. "I'm not storing my daily vehicle off-site. That's ridiculous." Her voice hardened. "Refusal to comply will result in consequences." There it was, the mask slipping. "What kind of consequences?" I asked. "Escalating fines. Possible hearings. Board review. We take violations very seriously, Mr. Falk. It's best to resolve them quickly." I exhaled slowly, fighting the urge to say something I'd regret. I had arrested armed fugitives with more rationality than this woman, but I knew arguing wouldn't change anything. Karen didn't want compliance. She wanted control. "I'm not moving my truck," I said firmly. She inhaled sharply, offended by the idea that anyone might tell her no, then the board will take appropriate action. "Have a wonderful day." She hung up before I could respond. I stared at the silent phone in my hand, forcing my breath to stay steady. Daisy walked over, arms crossed, brow raised. "Let me guess," she said. She didn't like being told no. "She'll escalate," I replied quietly. "People like her always do." And standing in that kitchen, holding that absurd violation notice, I felt it for the first time, the shift, the tension, the understanding that this wasn't a misunderstanding or a simple neighbor dispute. Karen had declared a war, and she wasn't even close to finishing. The next violations came so fast I started to wonder if Karen had my house connected to some kind of HOA surveillance radar. Every morning, without fail, something new showed up taped to my door like a passive-aggressive gift basket. The second violation was about my flag bracket. According to Karen's official notice, the bracket extended 19.5 inches from the exterior wall. The maximum allowed, 18 inches. I walked outside with a tape measure, checked it myself, and found it was 18.25. Not perfect, sure, but nowhere near what she claimed. I took photos from every angle, time-stamped, documented. The next morning, another violation arrived. This time, lawn. The notice claimed my grass had reached over 3.5 inches, which, according to the sacred HOA bylaws, was a level of wild, untamed chaos that apparently threatened the property values of every home within a 2-mile radius. I crouched in the yard, measured several spots, and got 3.2 inches each time. 3.2. Unless Karen had hired NASA engineers with laser measuring tools. She was simply making numbers up because she could. Then came the trash can violation. Trash container visible from the street, the paper said sternly, as if I had committed a serious moral offense. I checked my cameras. It was trash day. The can was on the curb, exactly where the city required it to be. I checked the HOA rulebook. It clearly said trash cans must be placed at the curb for pickup on collection day. Karen didn't care. Karen had transcended logic. The next violation nearly broke Daisy. It was for our welcome mat, the small one, by the door. The one with a golden retriever on it. Cute, harmless, and purchased from a perfectly innocent home decor aisle. The notice said it was an unapproved exterior decoration that did not align with the visual theme of the community. Daisy held the paper in her hand, stared at it, and then looked at me like she might actually combust. "It's a dog, Frank," she said flatly. "A cartoon dog." "I'm aware. How does a cartoon dog threaten the community?" "Great question." She threw her hands up. "No, this is insane. I mean actually insane. She's just inventing violations because she knows we're new and she wants to break us in." I couldn't disagree. Karen's entire personality operated on a simple engine. Find problem, create problem, punish problem, repeat. Daisy paced the kitchen, fuming. "We should confront her." "No, forget that. We should file our own complaints. Call the city, call the state, call the president." "I don't care. Someone needs to deal with this woman." I leaned against the counter, watching my wife get more fired up with every word. If we confront her now, we give her what she wants. And what does she want? Drama, resistance, a chance to escalate. She wants to provoke us so she can justify more violations. Daisy groaned like she was physically allergic to that idea. "So what do we do? Let her harass us? Let her invent measurements and attack household items like the welcome mat as a threat to national security?" "No," I said calmly. "We document everything." She blinked. "Everything?" "Photos, videos, timestamps, measurements, every violation, every false claim. If she wants a paper trail, we'll give her one. A very accurate one." Daisy exhaled and rubbed her temples. "I swear, Frank, this woman wakes up every morning and chooses violence." "More like paperwork," I said. "But yeah." From that day on, whenever a violation showed up, I didn't react. I didn't argue. I didn't knock on her door or write angry emails. I simply recorded, measured, photographed, filed, because deep down, even then, I had a feeling. Karen wasn't just a nuisance. She wasn't just a power-hungry HOA president with too much free time. She was the kind of person who would push until something broke. And I wasn't planning on letting that something be us. They started patrolling at night. Not just walking around like normal neighbors checking on things. No, these men acted like they were conducting black ops missions in a suburban cul-de-sac. It began around 10 p.m. one Wednesday. I stepped out onto the porch with a drink, hoping to enjoy the quiet. Instead, I saw 3 shadows moving across the street in synchronized formation, flashlights slicing through the darkness like they were searching for escaped prisoners. Then I saw the uniforms. Navy blue polos, matching baseball caps, same plastic badge pinned crookedly on their chests. The HOA police. Rick walked in front holding a clipboard like it was a classified battle plan. Phil followed behind, sweeping his flashlight dramatically across lawns. Nate brought up the rear, whispering into a walkie-talkie he clearly bought in a kid's toy aisle. "Unit 2 to base," he hissed, ducking behind a mailbox. "I've got a possible Class 3 garden gnome situation on Maple." I nearly choked on my drink. A Class 3 garden gnome situation. I didn't even know what that meant, and I was sure they didn't either. From my porch I watched them crouch behind bushes, roll their shoulders like Navy SEALs preparing to breach a door, and point flashlights at harmless front yards as if expecting landmines. At one point Phil got down on his knees, actually on his knees, and measured someone's lawn with a tape measure while whispering, confirming grass length, stand by for readings. I genuinely thought it was a prank. It wasn't. Every night, like clockwork, they patrolled from 8 in the evening until after midnight. They moved slowly, dramatically, like they were part of a TV crime show. Nobody asked to watch. Sometimes they even used hand signals. Hand signals. In a quiet Florida neighborhood filled with retirees, kids on scooters, and people who thought anything past 9:30 p.m. was the middle of the night. The walkie-talkie chatter became the soundtrack of the neighborhood. Base, I've detected a violation. Mark it down, code yellow. Copy that, proceeding with photographic evidence. Every time they said photographic evidence, they took a flash photo of literally anything, a driveway, a mailbox, one time even a squirrel. I still don't know what the squirrel did wrong. Neighbors watched through their blinds, confused and terrified at the same time. Kids whispered about the HOA spies. Pets barked at them. Delivery drivers avoided eye contact. And the funniest part, they refused to walk near me. Whenever I stepped outside, whether to take out trash, sit on the porch, or grab a package, they suddenly veered to the opposite sidewalk. Rick would stiffen, Phil would speedwalk, Nate would stare at the ground like looking at me might get him drafted into real law enforcement. They didn't know who I was. They didn't know what I did for a living. But something about me made them keep their distance. Maybe it was the way I watched them without blinking. Maybe it was the way I moved, habitually scanning, observing, quiet. Old federal instincts are hard to hide. One night, as they performed a dramatic sweep of the cul-de-sac flashlights, flicking back and forth like discount X-Files agents, I heard Nate whisper into his walkie, "Subject is outside. Repeat, subject is outside. Advise." Rick snapped back, "Avoid. Avoid. Circle around." I almost laughed. They treated me like a wild animal known to attack on sight. It would have been hilarious if it wasn't also deeply concerning. Because the longer I watched them, the more I realized something. They weren't just pretending, they believed it. They believed they were a real force. They believed they had authority. They believed Karen had deputized them into some kind of neighborhood military. And when people with delusions start believing their own fantasies, that's when things get dangerous. So I sat on my porch each night, calm, silent, amused on the surface, while inside I felt the slow crawl of unease. I didn't know when the line would be crossed. I didn't know how far they'd go, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This wasn't just petty HOA nonsense anymore. This was the beginning of something bigger, something that would eventually explode, and they had no idea how far out of their depth they really were. The drone showed up on a Monday night. I was on the back porch, finally relaxing after a 12-hour day, when I heard a faint buzzing. At first I thought it was a mosquito the size of a helicopter, because this was Florida, and anything was possible. But then a shadow passed over the patio. I looked up, and there it was. A drone, hovering directly over my backyard. Camera pointed straight at me. I stared at it. It stared back. Or at least the tiny camera did. I raised an eyebrow. The drone tilted slightly, almost like it was acknowledging me. Then it drifted backward, hovered for a few seconds, and flew away in the direction of Karen's house. I shook my head and went back to my beer. The next night it came back, lower this time. It hovered above the hammock, then above the grill, then above the kitchen window like it was checking the menu. I stepped outside, arms crossed. The drone rose just enough to stay out of reach, like a smug little robot playing tag. By the third night it was bold. 30 feet up. 20. 15. Daisy had had enough. "That is illegal," she snapped. "It's harassment." I nodded slowly. "You're not gonna do anything?" "Oh," I said, standing up, "I'm absolutely going to do something." I walked into the garage and returned with a long-handled fishing net. Daisy stared at me like I'd just brought home a medieval spear. "You're going to catch it?" "Permission to land," I said, twirling the net, "is about to be denied." I sat on the porch again, acting natural, waiting. The drone appeared right on schedule, rising from behind Karen's house like it was part of some HOA-approved sunrise ritual. It drifted over my yard and hovered, camera focused, almost curious. I stepped into the grass. The drone lowered. I took one step forward. It lowered more, like a dumb metal moth drawn to the porch light of stupidity. I bent my knees, net ready. First jump, missed by inches. The drone wobbled, surprised. Second jump closer. A rotor nicked the net rim. The drone panicked and shot up a few feet like it just realized gravity existed. Third jump, perfect. I swung the net upward and hooked 2 rotors. The drone shrieked like a dying robot bird. I yanked down hard. The motor sputtered, the body twisted, and the whole thing spiraled in a sad little death dance onto the patio stones, cracking apart in a spray of cheap plastic. The camera popped out and skittered across the concrete like a guilty eyeball trying to escape. I stood over the wreckage, breathing like I'd fought a bear instead of a toy helicopter. "Gotcha," I muttered. 20 minutes later, Rick stormed up the driveway, red-faced, panting, and sweating through his HOA police polo. He looked like a man who'd received a frantic call from his boss, which, knowing Karen, he probably had. "You destroyed HOA property," he barked. "Your drone crashed in my yard," I replied calmly, holding the broken frame. "I'm simply keeping it safe. You pulled it down with a fishing net. I saw you." "Interesting," I said. "Were you watching my property without consent?" Rick froze. He blinked rapidly, brain gears grinding loudly enough to hear. "That," I continued, "sounds like the kind of thing actual law enforcement might be interested in." His jaw tightened. "That drone was part of our official safety operations." I handed the broken drone to him slowly, firmly, like I was returning evidence. He looked humiliated just touching it. "Here's how this works," I said softly. "If that drone ever flies over my property again, I will report it, and not to Karen, to real authority. Understand?" Rick swallowed hard. His hand shook. "You're going to regret this." I smiled at him. "I really won't." He stormed off with the drone cradled in his arms, like a wounded comrade. 2 days later, a new violation arrived. Interfering with HOA safety operations. Fine. I laughed so hard Daisy came running into the room thinking I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. Because this was no longer a conflict. It was a comedy show. And Karen had no idea she was the punchline. And then without warning, everything stopped. No violations taped to the door. No midnight lawn measurements. No walkie-talkie whispers drifting through the neighborhood. No drone humming above the yard. No Karen. For the first time since we moved in, Florida Estates was silent. At first I thought maybe she'd finally burned herself out. Maybe she realized she'd pushed too hard, annoyed too many people, or simply gotten bored. But Karen didn't get bored. Karen didn't slow down. Karen didn't disappear unless she had a reason. On day 2 of the silence, Daisy stood at the kitchen window, arms crossed, staring out at the empty street. "This feels wrong," she said, "like the air is too still." I nodded. "She's quiet because she thinks she's winning." "Or," Daisy said softly, "she's planning something big." That landed in the room like a dropped weight. Because she was right. I dealt with dangerous people my entire career. Men who hid behind charm, manipulation, power, or fear, and they all shared one trait. When they stopped talking, something was coming. Karen avoided us completely. If we crossed paths while grabbing the mail or walking to the car, she turned away instantly, face stiff, eyes narrowed, lips pressed tight. Not a word. Not a glare. Not even her usual passive-aggressive smile. It wasn't surrender. It was calculation. One night I stepped onto the porch out of habit, expecting to see flashlights dancing across the lawns. Nothing. The street was empty, still. Even the insects seemed quieter. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was loaded. Daisy joined me, slipping her hand into mine. "Whatever she's planning," she whispered, "it's not small." I exhaled slowly, scanning the houses, the shadows, the softly glowing windows. My instincts prickled, a familiar tightening in the gut, the sense of pressure building before something breaks. "She's waiting for the right moment," I said, "the perfect opening. And when she finds it," I didn't answer, because in that quiet, I could already feel the first tremor of what was coming. The thing that would tear everything open and drag the entire neighborhood into chaos. Karen wasn't done with us. In fact, she was just getting started. The raid happened the one weekend I couldn't be home. I'd been assigned to help track a fugitive across state lines, a man wanted on federal warrants who moved every night and never slept in the same place twice. For 72 hours, I lived on adrenaline and gas station coffee, sleeping in the truck when I could, eating whatever didn't require a microwave. My phone stayed mostly off to preserve memory. My attention was on the hunt. That's the job. But the moment I left Florida Estates, Karen saw it. My truck gone. No sign of me. HOA gossip channels buzzing. Opportunity. She didn't waste a second. On the afternoon of the second day, at exactly 2:14 p.m., Karen marched up my driveway with her 4 self-appointed officers, Rick, Phil, Nate, and Doug, each of them puffed up in their matching HOA police polos, carrying clipboards like they were warrants and authority like it was air. They had prepared a document, a fake one, a masterpiece of delusion titled Emergency Compliance Warrant, complete with faux legal language, HOA seals, and Karen's signature at the bottom in thick black ink. It would have been funny if it hadn't been used to justify a crime. They knocked once. Nobody answered. Karen didn't hesitate. She told Rick to breach the door. He used a crowbar. It splintered the frame on the first hit. On the second, the lock snapped. On the third, my front door swung inward like a wounded animal. Daisy was in the kitchen when she heard the crash. She thought it was a burglary. She grabbed her phone and ran into the hallway, only to find 4 men storming inside and Karen behind them like a conquering general. Daisy tried to call 911. Phil snatched the phone, slammed it to the ground, and stomped on it until the screen shattered. When she tried to push past him to reach the neighbor's house, he twisted her arm behind her back and shoved her against the wall. She screamed in pain. Nobody stopped him. Karen stood there watching, satisfied, arms folded. "This is a lawful HOA inspection," she announced. "Non-compliance will not be tolerated." They didn't just search the house, they ransacked it. Drawers dumped, closets empty, furniture overturned like they were expecting contraband to fall out. And the entire time, Nate held up his phone, live streaming the raid to the HOA Facebook group, narrating in a tone meant to sound official, checking for violations, searching for hazardous materials, ensuring safety standards. Comments rolled in fast. "Teach them a lesson. Finally someone's dealing with them. Record everything." Daisy begged them to stop. They laughed at her. Then they reached my office. My filing cabinet sat in the corner, heavy steel, reinforced lock, federal-grade security. The moment Karen saw it, her eyes lit up. "Suspicious," she whispered, touching the cold metal like it offended her. "Very suspicious." She ordered Rick to open it. He jammed the crowbar under the lock and forced it until the metal bent and cracked. The door groaned open. The drawers spilled out. Papers fluttered across the floor like wounded birds. They didn't know what they were looking at. They didn't understand the danger. They didn't realize the level of crime they were committing. Witness protection files, names, statements, safe house addresses, sensitive information that could never fall into the wrong hands. And they were live streaming it to 300 people. Nate panned his camera across the scattered papers. "Wow, look at all this stuff," he said, laughing. This dude was definitely hiding something. Karen stepped into frame, smiling proudly. "This proves everything. Non-compliance, suspicious documents, unauthorized storage. These will be seized for community review." Daisy, still pinned against the wall, spat out 3 words that cut through the live stream. "You're all insane." But they didn't hear her. They were too drunk on power, too lost in the fantasy that a fake HOA warrant gave them real authority. They didn't know they were crossing a line.
Not a neighborhood rule.
Not a housing code. A federal boundary. And when I finally came home, exhausted and unprepared for what waited inside, I realized something with absolute clarity. They had no idea what they'd done, but they were about to learn. The moment I saw the destroyed filing cabinet, the scattered documents, the torn open drawers, my entire body went cold. Not angry, not panicked, cold. The kind of cold that comes from years of training, when emotion shuts off and protocol takes over. I stepped into my ruined office, took one breath, and dialed the only number that mattered. When my supervisor answered, I didn't bother with small talk. "This is Deputy U.S. Marshal Frank Falk. I'm reporting a federal evidence breach. Witness protection files have been exposed. Multiple unauthorized individuals gained access. The scene is unsecured." There was silence on the line, tight, controlled silence. Then Holloway's voice, steady, clipped, furious. "How many people saw the documents?" "Unknown. They live-streamed the break-in." Live-stream? That one word carried enough anger to shake walls. "On the neighborhood Facebook group," I said. "Rough estimate, 300 viewers." Another long silence. I could imagine his hand closing into a fist, the vein in his jaw tightening. "Secure the scene," he said finally. "Do not touch anything else. Units are en route." Within minutes, federal vehicles were pulling into the neighborhood. Black SUVs, county deputies, state investigators, a whole chain of command mobilizing in real time. Neighbors stood outside, whispering nervously as agents swarmed the street. They didn't know what was happening, but they could feel it. This wasn't an HOA issue anymore. This was bigger, much bigger. Inside, Holloway surveyed the destruction like a man trying to process the stupidity of what he was witnessing. "Jesus Christ, Frank," he muttered, crouching beside the scattered documents. "These files were under your protection. These people, these families trust us with their lives." "I know," I said quietly. "And they live-streamed it?" He shook his head in disbelief. The suburban HOA kicked open the door to a U.S. Marshal's house and broadcast protected addresses to 300 strangers. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. His silence was worse. 20 minutes later, my phone vibrated. It was command. 3 witness families have been moved to emergency safe houses, the voice said. You know what that means? It meant relocation, new identities, lost jobs, children pulled from schools, hundreds of thousands of dollars in emergency funding, months, sometimes years of stability undone in a single afternoon. All because a group of entitled neighbors wanted to feel powerful. Holloway stood up slowly, eyes narrowed. This isn't vandalism, this isn't harassment, this is federal. He ticked off the crimes one by one, voice darkening with each charge. Criminal trespass, breaking and entering, assault, threatening a protected spouse, live streaming federal evidence, destruction of government property, exposure of witness protection files. He paused, letting that one hang in the air. And impersonating law enforcement under false authority. I exhaled. Karen thinks she's untouchable. Holloway almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. She thinks HOA bylaws supersede the United States government. I've seen some delusional people in my career, Frank, but this is new. He paced the room, the gears turning behind his eye. If we arrest her now, he said, she'll claim ignorance, misunderstanding, overzealous volunteer work. Her lawyers will argue she acted in good faith. She won't learn anything, I said. Exactly, and 6 months later she'll be back running the HOA, ready to burn down another neighborhood. He stopped pacing and looked at me. We need her to incriminate herself, publicly. I nodded. A sting. A legal one, he said, and clean. He explained what the state attorney and federal prosecutors had agreed on. We needed a pattern of abuse. We needed proof of intent. We needed evidence of coordinated harassment. We needed her officers on record admitting they acted under her command. And we need her to say it herself, Holloway finished. We need her to declare her fake authority in a public setting, something we can't argue with, something a jury can see. I knew exactly where he was going. The HOA meeting. Holloway nodded. She holds court there, feels powerful, acts like a dictator. If there's anywhere she'll brag about her authority, it's on that stage. And while she's talking, I said, we flip the projector. Exactly. He didn't smile, but his eyes sharpened. We're going to expose everything she's done, every violation, every fake warrant, every order she gave these idiots, every second of that live stream. A quiet settled over the room, a different kind of quiet this time, purposeful, focused. Holloway put a hand on the back of a destroyed chair and said, almost to himself, she thinks she broke into a house. He looked at me. She doesn't know she broke into a federal operation. And in that moment, the entire plan crystallized. Karen Gregory didn't just threaten my home. She endangered people in hiding. She tore open federal files. She put innocent lives at risk. And now she wasn't facing fines. She was facing prison. Real prison. Federal prison. She just didn't know it yet. The first knock came the evening after the federal team finished processing my house. Daisy and I were still cleaning shattered pieces of our life off the floor. When we heard it, soft, hesitant, almost apologetic. When I opened the door, Margaret Wu stood on the porch clutching a thick cardboard box to her chest. The same elderly woman Karen had screamed at on our first day. Her hands were shaking. I heard what happened to you, she said quietly. I thought maybe you'd want to see this. She stepped inside, set the box on my dining table, and opened it. Inside were folders, dozens, photographs, letters, violation notices, copies of fines. She had labeled everything with dates, times, and short notes written in careful cursive. This is 3 years, she said. Her voice trembled. 3 years of what she's done to me. She showed me photos of the garden gnome taken the day before she threw it away under threat of daily compounding fines. Letters Karen wrote accusing her of visual clutter, fines for having her recycling bin out 30 minutes early, a violation for excessive wind chimes noise, even though the chimes had never made a sound. She told me, Margaret whispered, that if I didn't obey, she'd make sure I regretted ever moving here. Her eyes glistened, and for a moment the weight of her fear hit me harder than any violation Karen had slapped on my door. She wasn't the last visitor. Next came Tom Bradley, a retired cop with 20 years of service. He carried a manila folder under his arm and looked angrier than anyone I'd seen in this neighborhood. She came after me when I questioned her, he said, sitting down heavily. At a board meeting 2 years ago, I told her she had no legal authority to enter people's homes. The next day, Karen had slapped him with a structural violation, claiming his roofline was dangerously misaligned. The day after that, the HOA police showed up at his door with measuring tools. Then came daily fines. Threats of lien. Letters claiming he was hostile and uncooperative. She targeted me, Tom said, jaw tight, because I told the truth out loud. One by one, the others came. The Okafor family, who had been fined over $3,000 across 6 months because their patio furniture was an unapproved shade of brown. When they tried to appeal, Karen shut down the meeting. The Hendersons, whose 12-year-old daughter had been followed home from school by an HOA police patrol for suspicious behavior. Her suspicious behavior was carrying a backpack. A single mother who received 5 violations in 1 week for grass debris, even though she hired a lawn service. A couple fined for having a bird feeder excessive in nature. A man who received a notice for irregular hose placement. Another who was threatened with legal action for leaving his garage door open while he unloaded groceries. Each person walked into my living room with paperwork, photos, shame, frustration, fear, years of being intimidated, controlled, 17 households. 17 victims of the same woman who believed HOA bylaws were divine law. By the time the last neighbor arrived, my dining table was covered with paperwork, evidence layered on evidence. The stories blended together, forming the full picture of a dictator who had ruled a neighborhood through fear and manipulation. And something remarkable happened. They didn't just bring their stories. They brought their resolve. Tom Bradley looked at the group and said, "She's not just a bully, she's a tyrant. And now she's crossed a line even she can't excuse." Margaret nodded, clutching her folder like a shield. We were all waiting for someone to stand up to her. We were waiting for someone she couldn't crush. Daisy looked around the room, eyes softening. "You're not alone anymore, none of you are." For the first time since we'd moved in, the neighborhood felt unified, not by fear but by truth. People who had never spoken to each other sat shoulder to shoulder. People who once hid behind closed blinds now leaned forward, sharing, supporting, hoping. Because Karen may have controlled this neighborhood for years, but she didn't control it anymore. Not after what she did. Not after she broke into my home. Not after she exposed people in hiding. The community finally understood something powerful. She hadn't just crossed a boundary. She had detonated it. Once the neighbors began sharing their stories, the investigation shifted into something sharper, heavier, and far more precise. It wasn't just emotional anymore. It wasn't just personal. It was legal, federal. And every new piece of information strengthened the case forming against Karen and her little army. The first major breakthrough came when 2 HOA board members quietly contacted us. They weren't loyal to Karen the way her police force was. They weren't interested in going to jail for her. When they realized the federal government was involved, their excuses evaporated, and their willingness to cooperate appeared instantly. They provided access, legal access to the HOA's internal email server. The moment the IT analyst retrieved the first chain of emails, I knew we had hit gold. Karen had never learned the most basic rule of abusing power. Never put your crimes in writing. But she had, repeatedly. The earliest email file showed her instructing her officers to conduct enhanced surveillance on non-compliant properties. She defined enhanced surveillance as drones, nightly patrols, and documentation efforts that went far beyond anything allowed under state law or even common sense. Another email ordered Rick to approach the Falk property aggressively and to identify vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities. Her choice of word, not mine. She wrote like someone running a criminal organization, not a neighborhood committee. Then came the emails about other residents. One message to the board read, "If Margaret continues resisting, we will need to escalate. Make an example out of her, publicly if necessary." Another email addressed to Phil said, "Residents who challenge my authority must be reminded of their place. The HOA sets the rules, not them." She had written this proudly, fearlessly, as if she believed she were untouchable. But the crown jewel, the smoking gun, was her memo outlining what she called the compliance warrant system. A fake, fabricated instrument she claimed gave her legal authority to enter any home during suspected violations. She had typed the entire document herself, complete with fake statutes, non-existent case law, and her signature at the bottom, like a judge in her own imaginary court. Beside it, she wrote to the board, "This warrant gives us full authority. If they resist, document and escalate." Reading those lines felt surreal. A suburban HOA president inventing her own judicial system. And the worst part was that she genuinely believed it. Then we examined the live stream. Nate had deleted the original post, but he didn't understand how the internet works. Once something goes live, it never truly disappears. Multiple neighbors had screen recorded the stream. Others had taken screenshots. Someone even saved the comment thread. We gathered everything. The video footage showed exactly what Daisy had described: the break-in, the destruction, the mocking, the rummaging through private belongings. The moment they pried open the filing cabinet, it captured every smirk, every laugh, every violation. The audio was even worse. You could hear Karen's voice clearly. Search everywhere. He's hiding something. He thinks he can ignore my authority. Check the file cabinet, break it open if you have to. This is what happens when people don't follow the rules. And then, her proud declaration, the compliance warrant gives us full authority. That line alone carried enough weight to bury her. But the comment section was its own disaster. Residents cheering. People encouraging destruction. HOA officers bragging. Nate typing, Karen is gonna love this, low. Phil wrote, we're doing the community a favor. Dude's a problem. Rick added, authority feels good. It was all there, undeniable proof of conspiracy, harassment, and impersonation of law enforcement. Piece by piece, the case stacked itself like a tower of bricks, each one heavier than the last. Emails, footage, witnesses, testimonies, voice recordings, the fake warrant, the break-in video, the comments, the measurements, the threats, the fines. It was meticulous, devastating, airtight, and as more residents came forward, the picture sharpened further. A pattern, a motive, a leader orchestrating everything, and 4 willing participants carrying out her commands. Holloway reviewed the evidence late one night, rubbing his eyes with the back of his hand as he flipped through the stack of printed emails. She hung herself, he said quietly. All we have to do now is show the world the rope. He looked up at me. Our case is ready. Now we set the trap. The storm Karen had created was about to turn on her, and we were going to make sure everyone saw it happen in broad daylight. The plan came together the same night we finished compiling the case. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It wasn't some movie-style war room with flashing screens and shouting officers. It was quieter, heavier, because everyone in that room understood exactly what was at stake. Karen didn't just violate HOA guidelines. She crossed into federal territory, committed crimes she didn't even understand, and endangered innocent families who trusted us to protect them. She had to be taken down, and not in the shadows. Holloway looked over the table crowded with evidence and said, we end this publicly, visibly. No excuses, no misunderstandings, no room for her to twist reality. The monthly HOA meeting was coming up in 4 days. She always hosted it like a queen holding court, microphone in hand, PowerPoint prepared, rules printed, officers behind her for intimidation. It was her stage, her sanctuary, her throne, and that was exactly why it was perfect. We take her meeting from her, Holloway said, right in the moment she feels most powerful. The plan was simple on paper, complicated in execution. The first step, coordination. The county sheriff's department assigned Deputy Sam Braddock as point man, clear-headed, steady, respected. He'd been furious when he saw the footage of Daisy being grabbed. That anger simmered behind every calm word he spoke. 2 state troopers were assigned to back up the county deputies. 4 more county officers would be positioned outside the community center to block exits. My agency added 2 federal agents to the interior team, one disguised among the residents, other waiting near the entrance to manage federal jurisdiction once the arrests began. The choreography had to be flawless. Next came the projector. Karen loved her PowerPoints, loved statistics, charts, violation numbers, and dramatic bullet points, loved displaying her power on a big screen for everyone to see. So the tech team built an override, an invisible device connected to the projector's HDMI port that would switch input the moment Holloway pressed a button. Her slideshow would vanish, replaced instantly by the evidence of her own crimes. The emails, the live stream freeze frame, the footage of Daisy being held down, the fake warrant. Every piece of truth she worked so hard to bury. It wasn't just a trap, it was a mirror. And she was going to see herself exactly the way the world would see her after tonight. Holloway told me my role was simple, attend quietly. I almost laughed. Me, quiet at Karen's meeting? But he shook his head. You stand in the back, near the exit. Don't confront her. Don't provoke her. Let her talk. Let her brag. Let her dig the hole deeper. She will, I said. She always does. Holloway closed the laptop, the screen going black. Your presence is part of the trap. How? She's obsessed with you. She'll bring you up, probably mock you. She'll show off the raid. She'll brag about her authority. He leaned forward. We want her to reveal her intent in her own words. My stomach tightened. The thought of hearing her make a spectacle out of the break-in, hearing her talk about Daisy, it made my jaw clench. But I nodded. I can handle it. Good, he said, because once she starts talking, everything she says becomes evidence. When the night of the meeting arrived, I didn't dress like a federal marshal. I didn't walk in with a badge or authority. I went as the neighbor she thought she had crushed. I even played into it. Instead of avoiding attention, I parked my truck, the truck she hated more than life itself, right in front of the community center. Parked it perfectly centered in the best spot, parked it where she'd have to look at it every time she glanced toward the door. Parked it like an exclamation point. If she wanted a final spark to ignite her arrogance, that truck was it. Inside, my heart was steady. Daisy walked beside me carrying a casserole dish just like everyone else, blending into the background. The room buzzed with small talk. People grabbed food, sat in folding chairs, whispered about the special ceremony Karen had promised. I stood in the back, hands in my pockets, scanning the room the way I'd scanned warehouses, hideouts, safe houses, old instincts rising. Tom Bradley nodded at me from across the chairs. Margaret smiled faintly. The Okafors gave Daisy a reassuring look. We were no longer isolated victims. The neighborhood was awake now. A few minutes later, Holloway and the undercover agent slipped in through the side door, blending in like concerned residents. Outside, officers waited in position. Every piece was in place. Every breath felt heavier. Every second ticked toward impact. And at the front of the room, adjusting her red blazer, stacking her papers, clearing her throat like she was about to deliver a presidential address, stood Karen, smiling, confident, ready to rule. She had no idea the meeting she was about to run was actually the trap that would end her reign forever. The room was already buzzing when Karen stepped up to the podium. Red blazer sharp, hair lacquered into immobility, smile stretched across her face like she was hosting an award show instead of a neighborhood meeting. She tapped the microphone twice, savoring the hush that followed. This was her kingdom, her throne room, and tonight she intended to remind everyone of that. "Good evening, residents of Florida Estates," she announced, voice dripping with theatrical authority. "Thank you for joining us for our monthly community guidance meeting." She said guidance the way a general might say orders. I stood in the back, arms crossed, Daisy beside me, the casserole table behind us, smelling faintly of Karen's notorious 7-layer dip. Every chair was filled. People leaned against walls. Others hovered near the exit, whispering nervously. They weren't here for they were here because something in the air felt electric, like the storm everyone had been waiting for was finally about to break. Karen flipped her hair over one shoulder and beamed. "Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the incredible service of our community protection team." Her 4 officers stood and marched to the front, Rick trying to look fierce, Phil trying not to sweat through his shirt, Nate staring somewhere between proud and terrified, and Doug standing stiff as a mailbox. The matching polos, the plastic badges, the fake tactical belts, they looked like a Halloween costume group that got lost on their way to a house party. But Karen clapped for them like they were decorated heroes returning from war. "These brave men," she said, placing a hand over her chest, "work tirelessly to maintain safety, order, and compliance in our neighborhood. Their dedication ensures that Florida Estates remains the premium community it was meant to be." The room stayed mostly silent. A few forced claps scattered through the chairs. Most residents stared with tight jaws and reluctant eyes, as if unsure whether clapping would make them accomplices. But Karen didn't notice. She was too busy basking in her own spotlight. "And now," she continued, turning the page on her clipboard with dramatic flair, "I'd like to address a matter of recent confusion. Some residents believe they are exempt from community standards due to their employment or personal attitude." She didn't say my name, but half the room glanced at me anyway. Karen's smile sharpened. "Let me be perfectly clear," she said, leaning closer to the mic. "No one is above the HOA. No job, no title, no excuse gives anyone permission to ignore our rules." She locked eyes with me for one long, self-satisfied moment, waiting for a reaction she would not get. "And speaking of rules," she said brightly, "I have prepared something special, a presentation highlighting some of the excellent work our HOA police have conducted recently in defending our standards." Daisy tightened her grip on my arm. The moment had arrived. Karen turned to her laptop, clicked a key, and said, "Now some residents have complained about recent inspections, so I'd like to show you all exactly what we discovered." Her projector screen flickered. She frowned, tapped the laptop again. The screen flickered harder. Rick shifted nervously beside her. Nate leaned forward to whisper something, but Karen waved him off, annoyed. "Everyone please remain calm," she said, adjusting her blazer. "Technology can be temperamental. Just give me a sec." The projector hummed. The screen went black. And then very slowly, very clearly, the first image appeared. It was a freeze frame from the raid. Rick standing in my living room, smiling like he'd just found buried treasure, giving a thumbs up to the camera. Behind him, my bookshelf lay overturned. Papers covered the floor. The entire room inhaled sharply. Karen froze, hands hovering over the keyboard like she'd been turned to stone. She let out a shaky laugh. This is not my presentation. Something is wrong with... The slide changed. Phil holding the crowbar that pried open my federal filing cabinet. Another slide. Nate's live stream comments. "Oh, we're wrecking this dude's stuff. Karen is gonna love this. Check the bedroom next." Neighbors whispered. Someone gasped. Someone else cursed under their breath. Karen slapped the laptop so hard the table shook. "This is fake. Someone hacked the system. Someone is sabotaging this meeting." Another slide. Karen's email, "Make an example of the Falk property, publicly if necessary." Another. Her fake compliance warrant with her signature stamped proudly at the bottom. And then the image that sucked the air out of every corner of the room. Daisy, pinned against the wall, arm twisted, pain in her eyes. A ripple of outrage moved through the crowd like a shock wave. Karen screamed, "Turn it off. Someone unplug it. This is illegal." But the projector kept going. A voice rang out from the back, steady, calm, unmistakable. "It's not illegal," Holloway said, stepping forward. "It's evidence." Karen's mouth snapped shut. People turned. The deputies entered quietly from the rear. 2 federal agents stepped to either side of the room. Conversations stopped instantly. The entire meeting turned into stillness. And as Holloway moved down the aisle, the projector switched to one last slide. Karen, smiling in the doorway of my ruined home. She stared at her own face, projected 10 feet tall, caught in the exact moment she believed she'd won. Her breathing grew loud, uneven. The microphone picked up a tiny, trembling whisper. "No, this can't be happening." But it was. The trap had sprung. And this was only the beginning. For a full second after Holloway spoke, nobody moved. The projector hummed softly, bathing the room in cold light. Karen stood frozen at the podium, one hand hovering uselessly over the laptop like she still believed she could claw back control with a single keystroke. Then the next slide hit. A video clip burst onto the screen. Not an image, an actual recording from Nate's live stream, the room filled with audio. Daisy's voice, her gasp of pain. Phil's hand twisting her arm, her shoulder pinned against the wall, her blouse torn. The audience saw it exactly as 300 strangers had seen it that day. The entire room erupted. People stood up. Chairs scraped back. Someone shouted, "Are you kidding me?" Someone else yelled, "She hurt that woman." Margaret covered her mouth with both hands, eyes wide with horror. Karen scrambled backward, knocking over the microphone. "That's fake," she shrieked. "That's doctored footage. Deep fake, deep fake." But the audio was too real. The fear in Daisy's voice was too real. Phil's stupid little laugh was too real. And then the slide shifted again. A freeze frame of Rick holding the crowbar over my filing cabinet. Then the video continued, Rick wedging the tool under the lock and forcing it open. The room heard the crack of metal, the groan of bending steel. It sounded violent even on camera. Rick whispered, "We are so official right now. Karen's gonna knight us for this." Laughter again, from Nate, from Phil, from Doug. The neighbors reacted like they'd been slapped. Karen screamed over the noise, "Stop the video. Stop it. Turn it off." But the projector kept rolling, unaffected by her voice, her panic, her desperate flailing. The next slide landed like a hammer. A screenshot of Karen's email. "Make an example of him, publicly if necessary." The words were so big the entire room could read them without blinking. People gasped. One woman shouted, "She threatened him." Another yelled, "This is criminal." The murmur turned into chaos, voices overlapping, accusations flying, outrage boiling so loud it filled every inch of the community center. Karen clutched the edges of the podium like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Her face had drained to a grayish white. "That email is fake," she screamed. "It's fabricated. This is fraud. Someone hacked my account." Holloway stepped forward, hands clasped behind his back. "We pulled the emails directly from the HOA server with the board's consent," he said calmly. "Password protected, time-stamped, verified, not hacked." Karen stumbled backward as if the words were physical blows. The slide changed again, her compliance warrant, the fake seal, made-up statutes. Her signature in bold ink like she thought she was Chief Justice of Florida Estates. The room howled. "That's illegal." She forged legal documents. Oh my God, she thought she could break into people's houses. Karen shrieked, "That is a legitimate document. The HOA has power." Holloway shook his head. "No, it doesn't, not like this." The projector didn't wait for her to recover. The next slide hit harder than all the others. A close-up photo of the cabinet drawer pulled open, papers scattered. The first page clearly shown witness protection identity, confidential level 2 security. Neighbors went silent. Truly silent.
Not a cough.
Not a whisper. Not even a breath. It was the kind of silence that happens when people realize the nightmare was much bigger than they understood. Karen stared at the screen, blinking rapidly, her lips trembling. I didn't know what those papers were. Holloway's voice remained level. That is why you don't break into homes, ma'am. The projector moved to another clip, Nate Digg giggling as he panned across the exposed files. Look at all this. This dude was hiding something. Karen's gonna freak. The laughter echoed through the speakers. A voice from the crowd shouted, "You endangered federal witnesses." Another yelled, "You put innocent people at risk?" And then, as if the projector wanted to crush her completely, it cycled back to Daisy's face, her eyes wide, arm twisted, pain etched across every line. Karen snapped. She lunged at the projector cart, screaming, "Turn it off! Turn it off! This is illegal! This is a setup!" She clawed at the cords, yanking, pulling, almost tripping over her own feet. But the tech override was locked in place. She couldn't stop it, she couldn't unplug it. The HDMI port stayed lit like a glowing accusation. The projector simply kept playing. Slide after slide, crime after crime. Every word she thought she'd hidden. Every action she assumed nobody recorded. Every piece of evidence she created against herself. She staggered backward, hair falling out of its perfect helmet, mascara streaking, breath coming out in ragged bursts. "This isn't fair," she screamed. "You're all against me. This is a witch hunt." Daisy stepped forward for the first time, voice steady but quiet. "You did this to yourself." The room erupted into applause, not polite applause but cathartic applause. Neighbors who'd been silent for years stood up, clapping hard, shouting, cheering, reclaiming their dignity 1 decibel at a time. Karen covered her ears, shaking her head violently. "Stop clapping. I am your president. I am the authority here." The projector didn't care. The evidence didn't care. The law didn't care. Every crime she committed was illuminated in 10-foot-tall clarity for the entire neighborhood to see. And for the first time in her reign, Karen Gregory stood alone. The room was already chaos when the back doors opened. But when the first uniformed deputy stepped inside, everything froze. Deputy Sam Braddock, broad-shouldered, calm, and carved out of law itself, stood in the doorway. Behind him came 2 county officers, then 2 state troopers, then the 2 federal agents. 8 total, all armed, all stone-faced, all very real. The HOA officers stiffened like cardboard cutouts. Karen stared at them, wide-eyed, mascara streaking, chest heaving. For one wild moment she actually seemed relieved. She pointed at the projector as if the cavalry had finally arrived. "Yes," she screamed, "arrest them. Whoever did this. This is sabotage. This is harassment. I demand you shut this down." Braddock didn't even look at her. He addressed the room. "Everyone stay seated. Nobody leaves. This is an active criminal investigation." Karen blinked rapidly, as if the words didn't compute. "No," she said, stepping forward, wiping at her face. "No, you don't understand. I am the president of this community. I have jurisdiction here." Braddock finally turned to her slowly, like he was bracing himself for the inevitable stupidity. "Ma'am," he said, "you don't have jurisdiction over anything." Karen sputtered, "Excuse me? I run this HOA. I have authority." Another deputy stepped beside Braddock. "A homeowners association," he said carefully, "is not a government. It is not law enforcement. It is not a legal authority of any kind." Karen's face twisted. "That's wrong. The bylaws give us—" A state trooper actually chuckled. "Lady, bylaws don't outrank the Constitution." A ripple of laughter passed through the crowd, half disbelief, half emotional release. Karen jabbed a finger in Braddock's face. "You listen to me, you are interfering with official HOA business." Braddock blinked at her like she had just spoken in Martian. "Ma'am," he said, "you are interfering with reality." Karen let out a shrill scream. "I order you to leave this meeting. Now!" Braddock turned to the deputies. "Take her." 2 deputies stepped forward. Karen stumbled back, knocking over her podium. "No, you can't do this." "You are under arrest," Braddock said. "Criminal trespass, assault, destruction of property, impersonating an officer, obstruction of justice." Karen shook her head violently. "No, those charges don't apply to me. I'm with the HOA." He nodded. "Exactly." She backed away, hands flailing, screaming at the top of her lungs. "I know my rights. I know the governor. I know people in the state house. I can end your career." "You have the right to remain silent," Braddock said calmly. "I suggest you use it." I will not be silent. Suit yourself. The deputies grabbed her arms. She kicked, she clawed, she tried to wriggle free, her voice rising into a hysterical wail. I am the authority here, this is my meeting, this is my neighborhood. You can't arrest me in my own community center. Ma'am, Braddock said, you broke into a federal marshal's home. You're lucky we're not adding stupidity as a charge. Karen shrieked as they dragged her toward the exit. Let go of me, let go, this is illegal. I will sue you, I will sue your department. The doors closed behind her. Her screaming still echoed even after she was out of sight. But the avalanche wasn't over. Every eye turned to her officers. Rick, Phil, Nate, and Doug, standing frozen at the front like children caught stealing from a candy jar. Rick, always the wannabe tough guy, tried to stand his ground. His hands clenched, his chest puffed. I'm not going anywhere, he said. We are the official law enforcement of this community. One of the state troopers almost spit out a laugh. Braddock stepped forward. Sir, step aside. Rick swallowed hard. No. Why? You don't understand. Under Article 4, Section 2. Son, Braddock said, that article is worth less than the paper it's printed on. Rick grabbed Braddock's arm. Time stopped. Then it happened so fast the human eye could barely track it. Braddock spun, pinned Rick's arm behind his back, swept his legs, and slammed him to the ground. Rick hit the floor with a yelp that sounded painfully close to a squealing dog toy. You assaulted an officer, Braddock said, cuffing him. Congratulations. You just upgraded your sentence. Phil started shaking, full body shaking. Tears streamed down his face. Please, please, I didn't mean to. Karen told us to, she said it was legal, she said we had authority, she said. A deputy held up a hand. Sir, crying doesn't make it less illegal. I didn't want to, Phil sobbed. I swear I didn't want to, I'm so sorry. Oh God, I didn't mean to twist her arm, she told me to. She made me, The deputy gently turned him around and cuffed him. You can explain that to the judge. Nate didn't even move, he stared straight ahead, face pale, lips trembling, knees buckling slightly like he might collapse. A trooper approached him slowly. Son, you okay? Nate nodded numbly. You know you're under arrest, right? A tiny nod. Turn around. He did, quietly. Almost gratefully. Doug didn't speak at all, not a word, he just lifted his hands, already resigned, already defeated. Like a man who finally woke up from a long delusional dream and realized what he'd become. Within minutes, all four were cuffed and escorted out of the room, Rick swearing, Phil crying, Nate silent, Doug empty-eyed. The residents watched in stunned silence. Then the applause returned, soft at first, growing louder, then swelling into a full wave that filled the entire community center. A release of years of fear, frustration, humiliation, and helplessness. Daisy slipped her hand into mine. You okay? She whispered. I nodded, though my jaw was tight. Seeing them dragged out, she said, feels like justice. I exhaled. Justice is only beginning. Because Karen had screamed about jurisdiction, but now she was going to discover the truth the hard way. The HOA's pretend power meant nothing. The law was here, the real law, and there was no universe in which she could escape it. The dust did not settle quickly. Chaos never disappears overnight. But when it finally did, it left behind something none of us expected. Peace. Karen's trial became the talk of the entire county. It was strange seeing her in a real courtroom, hair undone, blazer missing its sharp edges, voice no longer thundering through a microphone. She didn't scream this time. She didn't lecture. She didn't wave around her fake rules like weapons. She sat small, quiet, shrinking every time another piece of evidence was played. The judge needed less than 10 minutes after closing arguments. Her sentence landed like a closing door. 2 years in state prison for criminal trespass, assault, and destruction of property. 18 months added for impersonating law enforcement. More time tacked on for obstruction and tampering with protected documents. She whispered something when they cuffed her, some last fragment of disbelief. A final "this isn't fair" that faded into the hallway, as the deputies led her away. For the first time since we'd moved into Florida Estates, the neighborhood exhaled. Her officers faced their own consequences. Rick, who had grabbed Braddock and pried open the cabinet, received 9 months in county jail. Phil, who'd twisted Daisy's arm, accepted a plea deal, 6 months plus community service. Nate got probation and mandatory counseling. Doug, who had barely spoken and never touched anyone, received probation and a fine. None of them strutted in their uniforms anymore. No more clipboards. No more midnight patrols. No more drones humming over rooftops. The fake authority crumbled faster than anyone expected. But the biggest change came from the court's decision to place the HOA under a temporary, court-appointed manager. A retired property attorney named Laura Keating stepped in, a woman who believed more in fairness than fines, more in community than control. Her first act was to suspend every outstanding violation. Her second was to dissolve the HOA police entirely. Her third was to call an emergency town hall, not for rules, not for punishments, but for healing. People showed up in numbers the neighborhood had never seen. Margaret sat in the front row, smiling softly as Laura announced a full audit of past fines and refunds for those unfairly charged. Tom Bradley stood beside me, arms folded, watching as neighbors raised their hands, not to complain but to volunteer for real committees. Gardening, events, safety watch. Nothing with power, everything with purpose. Daisy sat on my left, fingers laced with mine. "This feels different," she whispered. "It is different," I said. Because peace wasn't just the absence of Karen. It was the presence of something new. Something we'd almost forgotten this neighborhood could be. Kids played outside again without being documented. Elders walked their dogs without being interrogated about grass height. People waved from porches, chatted on sidewalks, helped each other carry groceries. Life returned to a rhythm unbroken by fear. Even my truck, once the symbol of Karen's rage, sat peacefully in the driveway. No orange warnings, no threats, no hostile notes taped to the windshield. Just a truck in a neighborhood finally learning how to breathe. Sometimes I'd catch Margaret watering her flowers, humming quietly. Sometimes Tom and I would talk across our fences, about sports or work or nothing important at all. Sometimes Daisy and I would sit on the porch at sunset, the air warm and steady, the world finally calm enough for a moment of gratitude. One afternoon, Laura visited us to thank me for helping rebuild the community. I told her the truth. It wasn't me. It was everyone who stood up, everyone who spoke out, everyone who decided they weren't going to be ruled anymore. "As strange as it sounds," she said, looking down the street, "maybe this neighborhood needed a storm to remember what sunlight feels like." Maybe she was right. Because Florida Estates didn't just become peaceful. It became home. And that, after everything we'd endured, was the justice that mattered most. Even now, months later, I find myself returning to the same spot at the end of the day, my porch, the place that used to feel like a battleground. Tonight it feels like it always should have. Warm, quiet, whole. The sun is sliding down behind the trees, turning the street gold in that soft, forgiving way Florida sometimes manages. I lean back in my chair, a cold beer resting against my palm, the wood beneath my feet humming with the last heat of the day. My truck is parked in the driveway exactly where it's been since the day we moved in. Same model, same color, same stubborn presence. For months it was the spark of every fight, every threat, every violation. Now it just sits there, peaceful, unbothered, a reminder that sometimes the things people fear are the things they never understood. I glance up at the flag bracket on the porch beam. 18¼ inches from the wall. Not a fraction more. I measured it this morning. Old habits don't die easily. It flutters gently in the breeze. Quiet, steady, loyal in its own way. Daisy steps out and settles into the chair beside mine. She hands me another beer without a word. We sit in silence, the kind that needs no explanation. The kind you earn after walking through fire and coming out the other side still holding onto each other. "You feel it?" she says softly. "Yeah," I answer. Peace doesn't announce itself. It settles. It sinks in slowly, like dusk. It finds the spaces that used to hold tension and fills them with something lighter, something warmer, something honest. A car passes in the distance. A kid rides a bike down the sidewalk. Somewhere a neighbor laughs. Normal, beautifully normal. It strikes me then how fragile peace can be and how strong people must be to protect it. I take a long breath of the cool evening air, letting it wash over everything we survive. And somewhere, maybe in a crowded cell with a broken sense of authority, Karen Gregory is still trying to understand how all of this slipped through her fingers. The answer is simple. Never mistake a quiet neighbor for a helpless one.